The Jewish Story Podcasts, Taking a Hint. What does it mean to take a hint? According to the dictionary, a hint is a slight, indirect, covert indication or suggestion. A hint implies something in an indirect way. It's quite normal in conversations for people to speak indirectly, for whatever reason. But what of communication between human beings and God? Does God hint to us? According to the Jewish tradition, the answer is yes. God talks to us through events in the natural world, in the human world, and through experiences in our inner world. Regarding the natural world, the Hasidic rabbi Nachman of Breslev wrote in the song Shirat HaAsabim, the Song of the Weeds, "Know that every shepherd has his own melody. Know that every blade of grass has its own song, and from the song of the grass comes the melody of the shepherd." Do we listen to the weeds or to the animals? Some did. The Hasidic rabbi, the Maggid from Mezerich, for example, would go every morning at sunrise to the nearby lake to hear what the frogs were saying. So the weeds and frogs speak to us. Can we hear them? Regarding the human world, there are many stories, particularly Hasidic ones, which exemplify how the world serves as a source of divine revelation. For example, Rabbi Simcha Bunim from Shischa once had his horses harnessed and travelled to Warsaw with several of his Hasidim. Quite a long journey. When they arrived there, he told the coachman to stop at an inn. They entered and sat down. At a corner table near theirs sat two porters who were drinking schnapps and talking about all sorts of things. After a while, the first one asked, "Have you already studied the weekly portion of the Torah?" "Yes," answered the second. "I too have learned it," said the first, "and I found one thing very hard to understand. It is the passage about our father Abraham and Avimelech, the king of the Philistines, where it says, 'And they two made a covenant.' I asked myself, why say they two? That seems superfluous." "A good question," cried the second, "but I wonder what answer you will find." "What I think," said the first, "is that they made a covenant, but they still did not become one. They remained two." Rabbi Simcha rose, left the inn with his Hasidim, and got into his carriage, and said, "Now that we have heard what these hidden tzaddikim, righteous people, had to tell us, we can go back home." What did they have to tell the Hasidim? What was hinted at in the words of the porters? Why did they have to travel so far and then immediately return home after hearing such a very short conversation? The hint was enough. The hint may come in the form of an inner experience, such as a dream. One of the most well-known dreams concerns a Jew by the name of Isaac, who lived in Krakow, Poland, at the beginning of the 19th century. He dreamt of a treasure buried under a bridge in Prague. Initially, he didn't pay attention to the dream, but the dream kept recurring night after night, and in the end, he took the hint. He understood that he had to go to Prague. When he got there, he saw that the bridge was heavily guarded, soldiers patrolling at all times. He tried day and night, checking out different sides of the bridge, but he couldn't find a time to dig under the bridge without anybody noticing him. Finally, he was confronted by the captain of the guard, who noticed him loitering around the bridge all the time. Isaac felt he had no choice and thought that maybe the officer would respond favorably if he told him the dream. The officer laughed. He said to Isaac, "Don't pay attention to the dream. Look, I dreamt that a man named Isaac from Krakow had a treasure buried under the oven in his house. Did I travel to Krakow and go look for someone called Isaac, of which there must be many? Of course not. Go home and don't worry about your dreams." When Isaac heard what the officer said, he right away started for home. On arriving, he wasted no time, dug under the oven in his home, and sure enough, found buried treasure there. With the money, he built the Isaac Synagogue in the Jewish Quarter, which is still standing. God spoke to Isaac through a dream. If God had wanted Isaac to find the treasure buried in his house, he could have told him directly, "Go get a spade and start digging straight away under the oven in your house." But he didn't. He put it to the test. Would he listen? Would he get the hint? In the end, yes, but he had to travel far in order to find out what was buried at home. A few years ago, Pamela and I visited Prague. We also went looking for the treasure under the bridge. However, it was not quite the same situation as Isaac, for we knew the story. Initially, I chose the wrong bridge. Then I realized, of course, it had to be the bridge leading to the palace of the king. It could only be the King Charles Bridge. On one side of the river was the town of Prague. On the other side up the hill was the emperor's palace. On either side of the bridge were the turrets where the king's soldiers used to guard the bridge. True, there were no longer any soldiers guarding the bridge, but I didn't fancy diving into a cold river, spade in hand. Have you ever had a recurring dream? There is a well-known story of a citizen from Tzfat, my hometown, who was about to take part in the 1972 Olympics in Germany as a member of Israel's weightlifting team. Before the journey, his father came to him in a dream, telling him not to travel to Germany. The dream repeated itself a number of times. In the end, he listened, decided not to go. At Munich, terrorists massacred many members of the Israeli team. Just a few months ago, I had a recurring dream, 3 times. In each dream, I was trying to do a number of jobs, and each time I ended up not succeeding in doing anything. It was a very frustrating experience. I knew very well that it accurately reflected my life, being involved with too many things, the end result being that nothing much got done. And I knew something would have to change in order for projects I am involved in to flourish. Did I take the hint? In part. If I had not paid attention to the dream, it is very unlikely that I would be recording this podcast. Rabbi Simcha Bunim from Pshischa would tell the Isaac story to every person who came to learn Torah at the house of study in Pshischa. Why? Because Rabbi Simcha wanted every new student to realize that the treasure is not to be found within the Rebbe, but in the student's own house. There he must dig and search, according to his ability. Or, in as many words, he must learn to be responsive to God's hints and not rely on someone else to serve up the truth on a silver plate. Hearing God's hints means developing a capacity to see connections between the overt and covert dimensions in life, to be surprised, to use our imagination to prevent our mind from settling, to allow place for the elusive, and ambiguous. We can only hear hints when we stop looking at the world as an arbitrary collection of events determined by chance, coincidence, and contingency. The people of Israel come from a long line of people who were takers of hints, a line some 3,500 years old. In fact, it was the founder of that line, Abraham, known as our father Abraham, who set in place the tradition of listening to hints. In the Midrash, the ancient commentary on the Torah, we read, "Yours is the dew of your youth." Psalms. Abraham was anxious and said to himself, "Perhaps I bear guilt for having worshipped idols all these years." God reassured him, "Yours is the dew of your earth. Even as dew evaporates, so have your sins evaporated. As dew is a sign of blessing to the world, so you are a sign of blessing." Shem Mishmuel, a 19th century Hasidic master, read the image of dew in a dynamic fashion. Dew rests for a moment on the grass and then vanishes. It evaporates. In that moment, however, it arouses the inner moisture of the grass, unlike rain, for instance, which moistens the earth and remains absorbed by it. In the reading of Shem Mishmuel, rain penetrates, implants itself. If God relates to Israel in this way, nothing will emerge from them simultaneously. Dew, on the other hand, delicately touches, awakens inner vitality and disappears. To know God as dew is to respond to a hint, and sometimes a word or two is enough. God reassures Abraham, "Yours is the dew of your youth. Your sinful acts acted like dew. They aroused you to search for God." Abraham's sins set processes in motion within him. They led him to God. As Abraham took hints, so did Bezalel, Mordechai, the Baal Shem Tov, and many, many others over the centuries. Listening out for hints is clearly not a simple auditory exercise. It reflects an inner process which the author Henry James and the poet John Keats described very eloquently. James describes what it means to write from experience. He says, "Experience is never limited and it is never complete. It is an immense sensibility, a kind of huge spider web of the finest silken threads suspended in the chamber of consciousness, and catching every airborne particle in its tissue. It is the very atmosphere of the mind, and when the mind is imaginative, much more when it happens to be that of a man of genius, it takes to itself the faintest hints of life. It converts the very pulses of air into revelations." Keats, like James, also evokes the image of the spider to capture the inner process of listening to hints in the world. "Now it appears to me that almost any man may, like the spider, spin from his own inwards his own airy citadel. The points of leaves and twigs on which the spider begins her work are few, and she fills the air with a beautiful circuiting. Let us not therefore go hurrying about and collecting honeybee, buzzing here and there impatiently from a knowledge of what is to be arrived at, but let us open our leaves like a flower and be passive and receptive, budding patiently under the eye of Apollo, and taking hints from every noble insect that favours us with a visit." Almost any man may spin his own airy citadel if he has the gift of receptivity. Points, germs, whispering, hints, such modes of air like dew or perfume may precipitate creation. That is, impressions are turned into personal experience. Hints are turned into revelations. For James and Keats, these revelations are responses to hints in the natural and human environment. According to the Jewish tradition, although, these revelations manifest in the natural and human environment, but their source is the divine. To know God as due is to respond to a hint. And sometimes the hint comes in a physical form. A Chassid, the first Lubavitcher Rebbe, the Baal HaTanya, once went to visit his Rebbe, the Maggid of Mezrich. After travelling a long distance, the Baal HaTanya finally arrived at the Maggid's house and knocked on the door. The Maggid came to the door, but instead of opening, he asked, "Who is it?" Baal HaTanya said, "It's me." The Maggid, however, did not open the door. Instead, he told the rabbi, "You have to go on a journey," without saying where to. The rabbi blindly obeyed, and he went off travelling far and wide until one day, while passing through a forest, he came upon a solitary house in a small clearing. Hearing voices of merriment inside, he went up and knocked on the door. The owner of the house greeted him joyously. "We are about to perform the circumcision ceremony for our son, and we need one more man to make up a minyan, a quorum of 10. The rabbi went inside. The ceremony took place and was followed by a traditional festive meal. In the middle of the feast, the lady of the house suddenly emerged screaming, "My jewels! My jewels! Somebody has stolen my jewels!" The rabbi was the only stranger in the house, so those gathered assumed he was the culprit, and immediately set upon him, giving him a severe beating. The more the blows rained down on him, the more he shouted, "It's not me! It's not me!" Fortunately for the rabbi, it was soon discovered that the maidservant had stolen the jewels, and the rabbi was released. After this incident, he decided that it was time to go back to the Maggid. So he set off again on his travels, eventually arriving at the Maggid's house. The rabbi knocked on the door, and the Maggid called out, "Who is it?" The rabbi answered, "It's not me." The Maggid opened the door, and a new man walked in. The rabbi's identity was no longer based on the me of the ego. To know who you are, that indeed is a treasure. So whether the hint comes in the form of blows, a dream, hearing someone sitting next to you in a pub, a word from your Rebbe, or one's own thoughts, when we are capable of listening to the message hidden within the event, we too are following in the footsteps of Abraham. We too are capable of hearing God's word at all times. We too are capable of hearing and responding. Why did God choose Abraham to be the receiver of the message, Lech lecha, go out of the land and from thy kindred, from thy father's house unto the land that I will show you? God chose Abraham because he was capable of hearing the message which God utters to all human beings at all times. Abraham proved he was the right choice because he heard and responded to God's words. And how do we prove that God made the right choice in sending us everyday hints? When we show that we are capable of responding, of taking the faintest hints of life and transforming them into revelations, when we convert impressions into personal experience, when we know God as due.